This first story comes from a man named Mark, and according to him, the reason he still hates telling it is because nothing about it sounds believable when he says it out loud. Not because it was some movie-style monster, not because lights were flickering or furniture was flying across the room. It was worse than that. It was quiet. It was slow. And for 3 nights in a row, someone stood outside his bedroom window and waited. Back in 2020, Mark was staying at an old farmhouse just outside Des Moines, Iowa. It belonged to a family friend who had inherited the property after his father passed away. The place had been empty for almost a year, and Mark was asked to stay there for a few weeks to help clean it out, take photos of old furniture, and get the house ready to be listed for sale. At first, it sounded like a sweet deal. Free place to stay. No roommates. No rent. No city noise. Mark was working remotely at the time, so all he really needed was Wi-Fi, a laptop, and a quiet room. The farmhouse gave him all of that. Maybe too much quiet. The nearest neighbor was more than a mile away. The nearest gas station was around 20 minutes down a 2-lane road. And once the sun went down, the entire property felt like it had been cut off from the rest of the world. The house itself was old, but not abandoned looking. It had a wraparound porch, white siding that had started to fade, and a gravel driveway that curved in from the road. Behind the house was a wide field, and beyond that, a line of trees so thick that at night it looked like a black wall. Mark's bedroom was on the first floor, facing that tree line. That detail matters. The room had one large window beside the bed. It wasn't broken, but it was definitely old. The frame was warped, the glass rattled slightly when the wind picked up, and the latch didn't always slide into place unless you pushed it hard. Mark noticed it on the first day. He even made a mental note to tell the owner about it. But like most people, he didn't think much of a bad window latch until it became the only thing between him and whoever was outside. The first few nights were normal. Mark spent his days going through boxes in the attic, sorting through old tools in the barn, and photographing furniture that smelled like dust and mothballs. At night, he'd make dinner, sit at the kitchen table with his laptop, and listen to the wind move through the fields. He actually liked it at first. It felt peaceful. Then, on the 4th night, he woke up at 2:17 a.m. He remembered the exact time because the red numbers on the alarm clock were the first thing he saw when he opened his eyes. At first, he didn't know what had woken him. The room was dark except for a thin gray line of moonlight coming through the curtains. The house was quiet. No TV, no fridge hum, no footsteps. Then he heard it. Tap, tap, tap. It was soft. Not a knock, not a bang, just a light tapping sound coming from the window. Mark stayed still and listened. Tap, tap, then nothing. He told himself it was probably a branch. That made sense for about 3 seconds, until he remembered there weren't any branches close enough to touch that window. Still, it was windy outside. Old houses make weird sounds. Loose siding can slap against the wall. A cable can swing. A bug can hit the glass. Your brain does that when something feels off. It gives you boring explanations because boring explanations help you sleep. So Mark rolled over and tried to ignore it. A few minutes later, the tapping came again. Tap, tap, then one more. Tap. This time, it sounded slower, more careful, like whoever was making the sound was trying not to be too loud. Mark sat up in bed. He stared at the curtains. They were still. No shadow. No movement. Nothing obvious. He almost got up to check, but then he had that weird feeling people get in the dark. That feeling that says, if you look, you might see something you're not ready to see. So he didn't look. He grabbed his phone, turned on the flashlight, and aimed it toward the window. The tapping stopped immediately. That was the part that bothered him. If it had been wind, why would it stop the second he turned on the light? Mark kept the flashlight pointed at the curtains for maybe 30 seconds. Nothing happened. Eventually, he turned it off and lay back down. He didn't really sleep after that. The next morning, he went outside to check the window. The ground beneath it was damp from the previous night's rain, but there were no obvious footprints. The grass was pushed down in a few spots, but that could have been from animals. The siding looked normal. The window was closed. Still, he walked around to the side of the house and looked at the trees. No branches, no wires, nothing that could have tapped the glass. That should have made him more nervous. Instead, he convinced himself he had overreacted. By afternoon, it almost felt stupid. A grown man getting freaked out by a sound at a window. He even joked about it to the owner over the phone, saying the house was low-key haunted. The owner laughed and said, "Yeah, that place gets creepy at night." Mark didn't ask what he meant by that. He wishes he had. The second night started normally. Mark stayed up late working. Around midnight, it started raining lightly. Not a heavy storm, just a steady drizzle that made the roof tick and the windows blur. Before bed, Mark checked the latch on the bedroom window. It didn't slide all the way at first. He pushed it harder. This time it clicked. He pulled the curtains shut, got into bed, and kept his phone on the nightstand. At 2:09 a.m., he woke up again. Tap, 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 same window. Same soft sound. But this time, it didn't stop after a few taps. It kept going. Tap, 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 tap. Mark opened his eyes, but didn't move. His heart was already beating too fast. He slowly turned his head toward the window. The curtains were glowing faintly from the moonlight outside. For a moment, all he could see was the fabric. Then a shadow crossed the bottom edge of the window. Not across the curtain, across the small gap where the curtain didn't fully cover the glass. It passed from left to right. Slowly, Mark held his breath. He told himself it might be an animal. A deer, maybe. But the bedroom window was raised several feet off the ground from the outside because the house sat on an old foundation. A deer could pass under it, sure, but it couldn't tap the glass. Then the tapping stopped. Mark waited. The room went silent. Then the latch made a tiny sound. Click, not opening, just shifting slightly. Mark froze. He stared at the window, hoping he'd imagined it. A few seconds later, click this time, there was no doubt. Someone outside had touched the latch. Mark grabbed his phone and turned the flashlight on again. The moment the light hit the curtains, something moved away from the window. Fast, not running exactly. More like someone ducking out of sight. Mark jumped out of bed, backed into the corner of the room, and dialed 911 halfway before stopping himself. He hated that he stopped. But at the time, he felt ridiculous. What was he going to say? Someone tapped on my window and then disappeared? He had no proof. No broken glass. No clear face. No full footprints. Nothing. So instead, he locked the bedroom door, dragged a wooden chair in front of it, and sat awake until sunrise. The next morning, he checked outside again. This time there was something. Not full footprints exactly, but marks in the mud under the window. 2 long smears, like someone had stood there and shifted their feet back and forth. There was also a small scratch near the bottom of the window frame. Fresh, Mark touched it with his finger, and flakes of white paint came off. That was enough. He drove into town and bought 2 cheap security cameras from a hardware store. Nothing fancy, just motion-activated cameras that connected to his phone. He put one outside, facing the bedroom window and the tree line. The other one he placed inside the room, on top of a bookshelf, aimed straight at the window. He also moved a dresser in front of the window. It wouldn't stop someone from breaking in, but it made him feel better. A little. That evening, the farmhouse felt different. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt like the house was waiting for the same time he was. Mark made dinner, but barely ate. He kept checking the camera app every few minutes. The outside camera showed nothing but the field and the edge of the trees. At around 11 p.m., he noticed something odd. The outside camera picked up motion near the tree line. When he opened the clip, all he saw was darkness and light rain. Then, for 1 second, there was a shape between 2 trees. It could have been a person. It could have been a branch. The quality was garbage, so Mark couldn't tell. But whatever it was facing the house. He saved the clip. Then he checked the doors again. Front door locked. Back door locked. Kitchen window locked. Bedroom latch pushed all the way in. Dresser against the wall. He left the lamp on and tried to sleep. That night, nothing happened for the first couple of hours. No tapping. No footsteps. No latch. Mark started thinking maybe the cameras had scared whoever it was away. Then at 2:14 a.m., his phone buzzed on the nightstand. Motion detected. Outside bedroom window. Mark's eyes opened instantly. He didn't move at first. He just listened. The room was quiet. Then came the tapping. Tap, 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 tap. This time, it was lower on the glass, right above the dresser. Mark slowly reached for his phone and opened the camera app. The outside camera feed was blurry and dark, not offline, not disconnected, but almost completely blocked. At first, Mark thought the camera had glitched. Then he realized the lens had been smeared with mud. His stomach dropped. Someone had walked right up to the camera and covered it. Then, the inside camera sent an alert. Motion detected. Mark looked toward the window. The curtains were still closed. The tapping stopped. Through the small gap near the edge of the curtain, Mark saw pale fingers press against the outside of the glass. Not monster fingers. Not some impossible thing. Human fingers. Thin, dirty. The nails looked dark, like they were packed with soil. They slid slowly across the glass, leaving wet streaks behind. Then the hand moved toward the latch. Mark shouted, "I called the cops." He hadn't, but the words came out before he could think. Everything stopped. The hand froze. For a few seconds, nothing moved. Then a face leaned close to the small uncovered edge of the window. Mark only saw part of it. One eye. A cheek. A mouth. The person outside was wearing something dark over their head. Maybe a hood or a ski mask pushed up just enough to see. The eye stared directly at him. Not wide and crazy. Not supernatural. Just calm. That was what terrified Mark the most. Whoever it was didn't look surprised. They didn't look scared. They looked like they had been expecting him to wake up. Then the mouth moved. Mark couldn't hear the words clearly through the glass, but he swears it looked like the person said, "Open it." Mark ran. He left the bedroom, slammed the door, and locked himself in the bathroom with a kitchen knife. This time, he called 911. He told the dispatcher someone was outside his window trying to get in. His voice was shaking so badly, he had to repeat the address twice. The dispatcher told him deputies were on the way and asked if he could see the person. Mark said no. Then, from somewhere inside the house, he heard a sound. Not at the window, at the back door. The doorknob turned once, then stopped. Mark whispered to the dispatcher, "They're at the door." The dispatcher told him to stay quiet and stay locked inside. For the next 10 minutes, Mark sat on the bathroom floor, holding the knife with both hands, listening to the house. There were two more sounds, a soft knock from the back door, then a scraping noise along the siding outside the hallway. After that, nothing. When the deputies arrived, they searched the house and the property. No one was there. But they found the outside camera tilted downward, with mud rubbed over the lens. It hadn't fallen. Someone had covered it on purpose. They also found fresh marks beneath the bedroom window. Shoe prints this time. Partial, but clearly human. The deputies checked the tree line, but didn't find anyone. They asked Mark if he had any enemies. He said no. They asked if he had posted online that he was staying alone. That question made him feel sick. Because he had. 2 days earlier, he had posted a photo of the farmhouse on Instagram with the caption, "Working from the middle of nowhere for a few weeks." His account wasn't private. The deputies told him that didn't prove anything, but they advised him to leave the property for the night. Mark didn't need convincing. He packed his laptop, wallet, and one bag of clothes and drove to a motel in town before sunrise. The next day, the owner came to the farmhouse and met him there with one of the deputies. In daylight, it almost looked normal again. Almost. The bedroom window had scratches near the latch. The mud below it was torn up. The outside camera was ruined. And on the back porch, just under the corner of the welcome mat, the deputy found something that made Mark feel sick. A damp piece of paper, folded once. When the deputy opened it, Mark immediately recognized the image. It was a printed screenshot of his Instagram post. The same farmhouse photo, the same caption, the same timestamp. The deputy took it as evidence, but nothing ever came from it. No arrest. No answer. No explanation. Mark left that same afternoon. He didn't finish the work. He didn't go back for the boxes he'd left in the room. And he never posted his location online again. A few weeks later, the owner called him and said he had installed new locks and motion lights around the property. Then, he mentioned something else. The bedroom window latch had been bent inward, like someone had been trying to work it open with a thin tool from outside. That confirmed what Mark already knew. Whoever was out there wasn't lost. They weren't drunk. They weren't confused. They had come to that window for a reason. And they came back 3 nights in a row because they knew he was alone. Mark says the part that still messes with him isn't the tapping. It's not the hand on the glass. It's not even the screenshot under the welcome mat. It's the way the person waited. Quietly, patiently, like they had all the time in the world. To this day, Mark doesn't sleep in rooms with uncovered windows. He checks every latch twice. And if he hears even the smallest tap on glass at night, he doesn't look outside. He turns on every light in the house. Because maybe it's just a branch. Maybe it's rain. Maybe it's nothing. But Mark knows sometimes it's not nothing. Sometimes it's someone standing in the dark, waiting for you to open the window. This second story comes from a woman named Sarah. And according to her, the scariest part about what happened wasn't that it felt supernatural. It was the opposite. Almost everything could have been done by a real person. Someone patient. Someone quiet. Someone who knew that cabin better than they did. A few years ago, Sarah and her boyfriend, Tyler, rented a cabin in the mountains of Washington State. They were both living in Seattle at the time, and both of them were burned out. Work had been nonstop. Their phones were constantly buzzing. Every weekend felt like it disappeared before it even started. So Tyler suggested a quiet weekend away. No emails, no social media, no city noise, just rain, trees, food, and sleep. Sarah was honestly into the idea. The cabin listing looked perfect. It was called Blackwood Cabin, and the photos showed a small wooden place tucked between pine trees with a front porch, a loft bedroom, a wood stove, and a kitchen that looked old but cozy. The description said it was secluded. Sarah thought that meant private. She didn't realize it meant isolated enough that if something went wrong, no one would hear them. Before the trip, the owner sent them a message with check-in instructions. The key was in a lockbox. The last 10 miles were gravel. Cell service would disappear after the old ranger station. There was a landline inside for emergencies. And then, at the end of the message, the owner added one sentence that Sarah thought was weird. Please keep all doors locked after sunset. Tyler laughed when she read it out loud. He said, "That's just rental safety stuff." Sarah agreed, but the wording still felt too specific. Not lock up when you leave. Not keep the cabin secure. Just after sunset. They drove out on a Friday afternoon. By the time they reached the gravel road, it had started raining. Not heavy rain, just that steady Washington drizzle that makes everything look gray and washed out. The road got narrower the deeper they went. Trees crowded both sides, and at some points the branches almost touched above the car. The GPS froze about 15 minutes before they arrived, but Tyler had already saved the owner's directions. He joked that they were officially in horror movie territory. Sarah told him not to say that. When they finally saw the cabin, it looked exactly like the photos. Small, quiet, surrounded by tall pines. There were 2 old chairs on the porch, a stack of firewood under a tarp, and a faded welcome mat in front of the door. The key was in the lockbox, just like the owner said. Inside, the cabin smelled like old wood, ash, and damp clothes. Not disgusting, just old. The main room had a kitchen on the left, a small living area on the right, and a narrow staircase leading up to the loft bedroom. There was a hallway in the back with the bathroom, a back door, and a locked utility closet. Sarah tried the utility closet handle without thinking. Locked. Tyler teased her for snooping. She said she was just checking the place. They unpacked and walked around like people do in rentals, opening cabinets, testing lights, looking through old books on the shelf, checking if the bed looked clean. Everything seemed normal, a little worn down, but normal. Sarah noticed the kitchen table had 4 wooden chairs. One of them looked different. The other 3 were light brown and scratched from years of use. The 4th one was darker, heavier, and looked older. It didn't match the set. She only noticed because it scraped loudly when she moved it. By evening, the rain got heavier. They made pasta, opened a cheap bottle of wine, and played music from a Bluetooth speaker. For a few hours, the cabin actually felt like the perfect escape. No notifications, no traffic, no people, just rain on the roof and firewood cracking in the stove. Before bed, Sarah cleaned the kitchen. She remembered this clearly because she couldn't sleep if dishes were left out. She washed the plates, wiped the counter, and pushed all 4 chairs under the table. Then she checked the front door. Locked the back door. Locked. Tyler smiled and said, "You good now?" Sarah told him the owner literally said to keep the doors locked after sunset. They went upstairs to the loft around 11:30. The first night, nothing major happened. But Sarah didn't sleep well. The cabin made too many sounds. Wood popping in the walls, rain tapping against the windows, the roof creaking when the wind shifted. At one point, around 3 a.m., she thought she heard a dull thud downstairs. She opened her eyes and listened. Nothing followed. Tyler was asleep beside her, so she told herself it was probably the wood stove cooling down. In the morning, Sarah came downstairs first. That's when she saw the chair. One kitchen chair had been pulled out from the table, not slightly, all the way out, and it was facing the kitchen window. Sarah stopped halfway down the stairs. For a few seconds, she just stared at it. Then she called up to Tyler and asked if he had come downstairs during the night. He said no. When he came down and saw the chair, he shrugged. "Maybe you forgot to push it in." Sarah said she didn't. Tyler said old floors aren't level. Maybe it slid. But Sarah knew that didn't make sense. A chair can slide a little. It doesn't pull itself out and turn toward a window. Still, she let it go. She didn't want to ruin the weekend by sounding paranoid on the first morning. They made breakfast and decided to hike a trail behind the cabin. The cabin had a binder on the counter with instructions, Wi-Fi password that didn't actually work, emergency numbers, and a hand-drawn map of a short trail loop that led to a creek. The trail started behind the firewood stack. At first it was nice. Wet leaves, fog between the trees, that quiet forest smell that feels clean and creepy at the same time. But about 20 minutes in, Sarah noticed strips of red cloth tied to some branches. Not official trail markers. They looked too random. Some were tied low, some were high, some were faded and torn. Tyler said hunters probably used them. Sarah didn't answer. A few minutes later, she saw 2 letters carved into a tree. T.M. The carving looked old, but the bark around it had fresh scratches, like someone had recently scraped at it with a knife. Sarah didn't know why, but seeing that made her want to turn back. This time, Tyler didn't argue. On the way back, they noticed a small shed behind the cabin. They hadn't seen it the day before because it was partly hidden behind trees. It sat maybe 30 feet from the back door, low and crooked, with a chain and padlock wrapped around the handle. The weird part was the door frame. There were fresh scratches around the lock. Some of the wood had been splintered, like someone had tried to force it open. Tyler acted casual. but Sarah could tell he noticed it too. He said maybe the owner had trouble with the lock. Sarah said, "With what, a knife?" Tyler didn't answer. That afternoon, the cabin didn't feel cozy anymore. Nothing dramatic had happened, but the place felt different. Too quiet. Too still. Like the woods were closer than before. Around sunset, Tyler went outside to grab more firewood. He was only gone maybe 3 minutes. When he came back in, he locked the door behind him without joking about it. Sarah asked what was wrong. He said nothing, but he looked out the kitchen window before sitting down. Sarah asked again. Tyler finally said he thought he heard movement near the shed, not an animal. Footsteps, he called out, but no one answered. Sarah immediately said they should leave. Tyler hesitated. That scared her more than if he had laughed it off. He said it was probably nothing. Maybe a raccoon. Maybe the owner had come by earlier. Maybe another cabin was nearby. But there weren't supposed to be other cabins nearby. And the owner lived almost 2 hours away. Still, they stayed. That night, Sarah made soup because it was easy, and because she wanted something normal to focus on. Tyler kept the fire going. They played cards for a while, but neither of them was really into it. Before going upstairs, Sarah took a photo of the kitchen with her digital camera. It started as a joke. She wanted proof that she had pushed the chairs in. She stood near the bottom of the stairs and took one picture of the kitchen table. All 4 chairs were pushed in. She showed Tyler. He raised his hands and said, "Okay, detective, you win." They went upstairs around midnight. Sarah woke up at 3:04 a.m. The first thing she noticed was the smell. Wet dirt, rotten leaves, old smoke. Like someone had walked through the woods in soaked clothes and then stood inside a closed room. She stayed still. At first, she thought maybe the wood stove had gone out weird. Then, she heard it. A sound from downstairs. Not footsteps, not knocking. Humming, soft, low, barely loud enough to hear. The melody was uneven, like whoever was humming didn't really know the tune. Sarah turned toward Tyler. He was asleep. She grabbed his arm and squeezed hard. He woke up annoyed, but before he could say anything, she put her finger to her lips. Then, he heard it too. His expression changed instantly. The loft railing overlooked part of the main room downstairs. From where they were, they could see the kitchen table, but not the whole room. Sarah crawled slowly to the railing and looked down. Someone was sitting at their kitchen table. A man. His back was toward them. He was sitting in the darker chair. The one that didn't match. His head was slightly bowed, and both hands were resting flat on the table. For a second, Sarah's brain refused to understand what she was seeing. The doors had been locked. They were supposed to be alone. The man's clothes were wet. Mud had dripped from his boots onto the kitchen floor. He didn't look like a ghost. He didn't look like some creepy movie creature. He looked like a real man sitting in their rental cabin at 3 a.m. And that made it worse. Tyler whispered, "Hey." The humming stopped. The man didn't turn around. Tyler said louder, "Hey man, what are you doing in here?" The man lifted his head slightly. In the kitchen window reflection, Sarah could see part of his face. Pale, middle-aged. Short gray beard. Dark hair stuck to his forehead from the rain. But he wasn't looking at them. He was looking toward the front door, like he was waiting for someone. Tyler stood up. Sarah grabbed his sleeve, but he pulled away and started down the stairs. She whispered for him to stop. He didn't. Tyler got halfway down and said, "You need to leave. Right now." The man slowly turned his head, not all the way, just enough that they could see the side of his face. Then he said quietly, "She used to sit here." Tyler froze. The man tapped the table once with 2 fingers. Tap, then again. Tap. Sarah felt sick. Tyler said, "Who?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he turned back toward the front door and whispered, "She's coming back." That was when Sarah noticed the back door. From the loft, she could see part of the hallway. The back door was open, not wide, just a few inches. Rain blew in through the gap. Sarah knew Tyler had locked it. She had watched him lock it. The man at the table started humming again. Tyler backed up the stairs, slowly at first. Then, faster. When he reached Sarah, he whispered, "Get the keys." Sarah grabbed the car keys from her bag. Tyler grabbed the flashlight. Their plan was simple. Go down the stairs, get to the front door, run to the car. But when they reached the bottom step, the man stood up. Not aggressively. He didn't rush them. He didn't shout. He just stood up calmly, like he had all the time in the world. He was tall, thin, and covered in mud from the knees down. Sarah could smell him now. Wet clothes, dirt, something sour and old. Tyler kept the flashlight pointed at him. The man raised one hand, like he was telling them to be quiet. Then he said, "Don't open it when she knocks." A second later, someone knocked on the front door. 3 soft knocks. Knock, knock, knock. Sarah screamed. Tyler grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the back hallway instead. The man stayed beside the table, staring at the front door. The back door was still open. Tyler shoved it the rest of the way, and they ran outside into the rain. Sarah wasn't wearing shoes. The ground was freezing. Mud and sharp gravel cut into her feet, but she barely felt it. Behind them, from inside the cabin, the humming started again. Louder this time. They reached the car. Tyler fumbled with the keys because his hands were shaking. Sarah kept looking back at the cabin. The kitchen window glowed faintly from the dying fire. The man was still standing inside. But he wasn't looking at them. He was looking past them, toward the trees behind the car. Sarah turned. At the edge of the driveway, just beyond the headlights, someone else was standing in the rain. Sarah couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. The person was wearing a long, dark raincoat with the hood pulled low. They weren't moving. They were just standing there, watching. Tyler got the engine started. The headlights hit the figure for half a second. Then, the person stepped backward into the trees. Not fast. Not panicked. Just slowly. Like they didn't care if they were seen. Tyler slammed the car into reverse, nearly hit a stump, then spun around and drove down the gravel road way too fast. They didn't stop until they reached the old ranger station, where Sarah finally got 1 bar of service. She called 911. The dispatcher asked if they were injured. Sarah said no, but there was a man inside the cabin. Maybe another person outside. Maybe 2 people. She knew she sounded hysterical. Tyler kept saying, "Tell them the back door was open. Tell them he got in somehow." Deputies met them at a gas station almost an hour later. By then, Sarah's feet were bleeding through the towel the cashier had given her. 2 deputies went up to the cabin while Sarah and Tyler waited in town. When they came back, they said no one was inside. No man. No second person. No forced entry on the front door. But the back door was unlocked. There was mud on the kitchen floor. And there were partial boot prints near the back hallway. The deputies asked if Sarah and Tyler were sure they locked the back door. Both of them said yes. One deputy asked if they had been drinking. Tyler got mad, but Sarah understood why he asked. They had wine earlier. Not a lot, but enough for the deputies to think maybe they had panicked and misunderstood something. Then, Sarah remembered the photo, the one she had taken before bed. She pulled out the digital camera and showed it to them. At first, the photo looked normal. Kitchen table, 4 chairs pushed in, window behind them. But when Sarah zoomed in on the reflection in the kitchen window, there was someone standing near the back hallway, barely visible. A man-shaped reflection. The deputies stopped joking after that. One of them asked when she took the photo. Sarah said right before they went upstairs. Before they heard anything. Before they knew anyone was there. The deputy asked to take a copy of the image. Sarah gave it to him. The next morning, the cabin owner called. He sounded nervous, but also annoyed, like he was trying not to admit anything that would make him responsible. He said he was sorry about what happened. He claimed there had been break-ins in the area before, mostly homeless people or hunters using empty cabins during bad weather. Sarah asked why he hadn't mentioned that before. The owner said he didn't want to scare renters. Tyler asked about the darker kitchen chair. The owner went quiet. Then he said that chair wasn't supposed to be inside the cabin. According to him, the 4th chair belonged to the previous family who owned the property. He had kept it locked inside the shed because it was old and unstable. Sarah asked how it got inside. The owner didn't answer right away. Then, he said maybe the cleaning crew moved it. But there was no cleaning crew scheduled before their stay. And when the deputies checked the shed, they found the padlock damaged. The scratches around the lock weren't old. Someone had recently forced it open. Inside the shed, they found signs that someone had been spending time there. A sleeping bag. Empty food cans. A small flashlight. Wet clothes hanging from a nail. And a plastic grocery bag full of printed rental pages for different cabins in the area. Blackwood Cabin was one of them. That detail changed everything. This wasn't some random hiker who got lost. Someone had been watching rentals, maybe waiting for people to show up, maybe using empty cabins when no one was around, or maybe something worse. Sarah asked if the man was caught. He wasn't, at least not then. The deputies said they would increase patrols in the area, but that didn't exactly make Sarah feel better. There was one gravel road, in and out, miles of trees, and no cell service. Patrols didn't mean much out there. A few days later, Sarah searched online for anything connected to Blackwood Cabin. At first, she found nothing helpful, just old rental reviews and hiking posts. Then, she found a local forum thread from years earlier. Someone mentioned that before the cabin became a rental, it belonged to a family named Mercer. A husband, wife, and adult son. The wife had disappeared during a winter storm after an argument. The husband claimed she walked out into the rain and never came back. Search teams never found her. A few months later, the son disappeared too. The husband sold the property and moved away. There were rumors. Obviously, small towns always have rumors. Some people thought the husband had killed them, Some thought the son had done something and ran. Some thought the wife had left on purpose. But one comment stuck with Sarah. A local wrote that after the wife disappeared, the husband kept setting a place for her at the kitchen table every night. Same chair, facing the front door, waiting for her to come home. Sarah doesn't know if the man they saw was connected to that family. Maybe he was just some unstable stranger who had found the old chair in the shed and knew the cabin's history. Maybe he had been living around the property for weeks. Maybe he watched renters come and go. Honestly, the realistic explanation scared her more, because whoever he was, he got into a locked cabin in the middle of the night. He sat at their table. He moved around while they slept. And he knew exactly which chair to use. 2 weeks later, Sarah got one final call from the owner. He told her the property was being taken off rental sites. She asked why. He said there had been a fire. The cabin didn't burn completely, but the kitchen and back hallway were badly damaged. The official cause was electrical, but investigators found signs that someone had been staying in the shed again after Sarah and Tyler left. More food wrappers, a second sleeping bag, fresh footprints behind the cabin, and according to the owner, one thing was missing from the damaged kitchen: the dark wooden chair. The one that wasn't supposed to be there in the first place. Sarah never got her deposit back. She didn't care. She never wanted to see that place again. For months afterward, she couldn't sleep without checking the locks multiple times. Tyler installed a camera above their apartment door. Sarah stopped booking secluded rentals completely. But the thing that still sticks with her most is not the man at the table. It's not the smell of mud and wet pine. It's not even the person standing at the edge of the driveway. It's the warning. Don't open it when she knocks. Because Sarah has replayed that night in her head hundreds of times, and she keeps coming back to one question. If the man inside the cabin was the danger, why did he sound scared of whoever was at the door? This third story comes from a long-haul trucker named Mike. And according to him, the thing most people don't understand about driving alone at night is how fast your mind starts working against you. When you're out on an empty highway at 3 a.m, with nothing but desert on both sides and the same stretch of road in front of you for miles, normal things start feeling wrong. A shadow near a sign starts looking like a person. Static on the radio starts sounding like voices. A jacket hanging behind your seat starts looking like someone standing there. Mike knew all of that. He had been driving trucks for almost 20 years. He wasn't new to long nights, sketchy gas stations, bad roads, or weird people hanging around truck stops. So when Mike says this wasn't his imagination, he says it with confidence. Because imagination doesn't leave desert dust inside your sleeper cab. And it definitely doesn't leave someone else's jacket under your bunk. This happened during a summer route through Nevada. Mike was hauling refrigerated produce toward Reno and was already running behind schedule because the pickup had taken longer than expected. It wasn't a disaster, but it meant he had to drive through the night if he wanted to make delivery on time. The weather was dry and hot. Even after midnight, the heat still sat over the road like it didn't want to leave. The highway was nearly empty, and there were long stretches where Mike didn't pass another vehicle for 20 or 30 minutes. No houses, no streetlights, no traffic, just dark desert and the low hum of the truck. Around 2:40 a.m., Mike decided to stop for fuel and coffee at a small gas station off the highway. He had stopped there once before years earlier, but he barely remembered it. It wasn't a proper truck stop, no restaurant, no showers, no row of rigs parked under big lights, just 2 pumps, a small store, a bathroom around the side, and an old sign that flickered every few seconds. The kind of place you only stop at because the next option is too far away. Mike pulled in and immediately noticed there were no other customers. No cars. No pickups. No other trucks. The store looked open, but barely. He left the engine running because of the refrigerated trailer, locked the cab, and went inside. The cashier was an older guy sitting behind the counter, watching a small TV with the volume turned low. He barely looked at Mike when he walked in. Mike grabbed a large coffee, a bottle of water, and one of those gas station sandwiches he knew he'd regret later. As he was paying, he looked through the front window and noticed someone standing near pump 2. A man, tall and thin, wearing a brown suit jacket that looked completely out of place. Not a hoodie, not work clothes, not road trip clothes. A dusty brown suit jacket, dusty pants, and dark shoes that looked like they had been walked through dirt for hours. But there was no car beside the pump, no gas can, no backpack, nothing. The man was just standing there. Mike looked at him for a second, waiting for him to move. He didn't. Mike asked the cashier, "Yo, is that guy outside with somebody?" The cashier didn't answer right away. He kept looking at the TV. Mike nodded toward the window. The dude by pump 2. He good? The cashier finally looked outside. For 1 second, his face changed. Not fear exactly. More like he recognized something he didn't want to talk about. Then he looked back at Mike and said, "People pass through." Mike frowned. "Yeah, but he doesn't have a car." The cashier shrugged. "Not my business." That response didn't sit right with Mike. Truckers learn to read people. And the cashier wasn't acting like someone who didn't care. He was acting like someone who didn't want to get involved. Still, Mike wasn't trying to start anything at 3 in the morning in the middle of the desert. He paid for his stuff, took his coffee, and walked back outside. The man by the pump turned his head slightly as Mike passed. Not fully. Just enough that Mike felt him watching. Mike kept walking, unlocked his cab, climbed in, and locked the door behind him. Before pulling out, he checked the side mirror. The man was still standing there. Same spot. Same blank look. Mike drove away and told himself it wasn't his problem. For the next 20 minutes, everything seemed normal. The coffee tasted burnt. The radio faded in and out. The road stretched ahead in one long black line. Mike kept one hand on the wheel and tried not to think about the guy at the gas station. Then he noticed something small. The passenger side overhead cabinet was open. Not wide open, just cracked. Mike didn't remember leaving it that way. At first, he ignored it. Things shift in trucks all the time. A cabinet that wasn't latched properly can pop loose after a bump in the road. But a few miles later, he heard something behind him. A soft brushing sound. Like fabric moving against plastic. Mike glanced at the small mirror angled toward the sleeper cab. The sleeper curtain was almost fully closed. That was weird. Mike always kept it partly open when driving at night. It made the cab feel less boxed in, and he liked being able to see the sleeper area behind him. Now the curtain was pulled almost all the way across. He stared at it for a second. Then he looked back at the road. His first thought was that it must have shifted when he got back into the truck. Maybe he bumped it. Maybe the air pressure from closing the door moved it. But curtains don't usually slide shut by themselves. Mike reached back with one hand and yanked it open. The sleeper looked empty. Bunk, blanket, duffel bag. Mini fridge. Nothing obvious. He let out a breath and kept driving. A few minutes later, warm desert air brushed the back of his neck. That made him sit up straight. The yak was on low, but this wasn't cool air from a vent. It was warm, dry, outdoor air. Mike checked the passenger window. Closed. Driver window. Closed. Then he reached behind him and felt around the small vent window near the sleeper. It was cracked open. Only a couple inches. But Mike never opened that window. Never. He pulled onto the shoulder and stopped the truck. The moment he stopped, everything outside went silent. No cars passing. No wind. Just the engine rumbling and the refrigerated trailer humming behind him. Mike turned on the dome light and looked back into the sleeper. The vent window was open about 2 inches. Not enough for a grown man to climb through, but enough for someone to reach in if they knew where the latch was. He shut it and locked it. Then he checked the sleeper properly. Under the bunk. Behind the curtain. Inside the cabinet. Inside his duffel bag. Nothing. No person. No missing cash. No obvious sign of anyone being there. Still, something felt off. The blanket on the bunk looked shifted. His duffel bag zipper was half open, and there was a faint line of dust on the floor mat near the sleeper. Mike told himself he was letting the gas station guy get in his head. He got back on the road, but this time, he turned the radio off. He wanted to hear everything. For the next 10 minutes, he drove with both hands on the wheel, eyes moving from the road to the mirrors and back again. That's when his phone slid in the cup holder and tapped against the plastic. The sound made him jump. He cursed under his breath, picked it up, and pressed the side button to check the time. The screen lit up. No service. No notifications. Just his lock screen. But because the cab was dark, the black screen reflected the sleeper area behind him. And for half a second, Mike saw movement in that reflection. Low, near the bunk, like someone had shifted from a crouched position. Mike dropped the phone into his lap. His hands gripped the steering wheel so hard his fingers hurt. He looked into the sleeper mirror. Nothing, just darkness behind the curtain. He wasn't going to keep wondering. Mike hit the brakes and pulled onto the shoulder again, harder than he meant to. The trailer rocked behind him. Loose receipts and a pen flew off the dashboard. He grabbed the heavy metal flashlight beside his seat and spun around. "Get out," he shouted. The sleeper was empty, but this time, it didn't look untouched. The blanket had been pulled halfway off the bunk. One cabinet was hanging open. His duffel bag was open wider than before. And on the floor mat, near the passenger side, there were dusty marks. Not clear footprints, but enough to know something dirty had been dragged or stepped through there. Mike checked every corner. Under the bunk. Behind the mattress, inside the storage compartment. Nothing. Then he saw the dash indicator. Passenger door open. The door looked closed from where he was sitting, but the sensor showed it hadn't fully latched. Someone had slipped out. Mike sat frozen for a second. Then, everything clicked in a way that made his stomach turn. Someone had gotten into his truck while he was inside the gas station. Maybe they picked the lock. Maybe the door didn't latch right after he stepped out. Maybe they had been watching him from the pump and waited for the perfect moment. Whoever it was had been hiding in the sleeper for almost 50 miles. Mike stepped down from the cab with the flashlight raised. The desert around him was black. His headlights lit up the shoulder, a patch of gravel, and some dry brush. Beyond that, nothing. Then he heard a crunch near the back of the trailer. Mike swung the flashlight toward the sound. For a second, he saw a person near the rear wheels. Tall, thin, brown jacket. Head tilted down. Then the figure moved behind the trailer and disappeared into the dark. Mike backed toward the cab. He didn't chase him. That's how people get hurt. He got back inside, locked both doors, and tried to call 911. No signal. Of course. He tried again. Nothing, so he started driving. Fast, not reckless, but fast enough that delivery time and fuel economy didn't matter anymore. His plan was simple. Keep moving until he got service. Don't stop on the shoulder again. Don't open either door. About 10 miles later, Mike saw headlights behind him. At first, he felt relieved. Another vehicle meant he wasn't completely alone. But then the headlights stayed the same distance back. Not passing, not falling behind, just following. Mike changed lanes. The headlights changed lanes. He slowed down slightly. They slowed too. He sped up. They sped up. Mike grabbed the CB mic and called out, "Anybody eastbound near mile marker 118? I think I got a vehicle following me." For a few seconds, there was only static. Then a broken voice came through. It sounded like another driver, far ahead or far behind. "Don't stop on the shoulder. Get to lights." Mike pressed the mic. "Say again?" Static. Then the voice came through again, weaker this time. "If you're being followed, get somewhere lit up. Don't stop." That was enough for Mike. He kept driving. The headlights stayed behind him for another 15 miles. Every few seconds, Mike looked toward the sleeper mirror, expecting to see someone back there again. But the sleeper stayed empty. Then he saw a sign for a way station ahead. Closed, no staff, no line of trucks. But there was a wide pull-off area, a small building, and at least a couple of overhead lights still working. Better than the shoulder. Mike waited until the last second, then pulled in without signaling. The vehicle behind him kept going. At least, that's what it looked like. The headlights passed the entrance and disappeared down the highway. Mike parked under the brightest light in the lot and checked his phone. 1 bar. He called 911 again. This time it went through. He explained as clearly as he could. Someone had been in his cab. Someone got out near the shoulder. A vehicle might have followed him. The dispatcher told him to stay in the locked truck and wait for a state trooper. Mike waited almost 30 minutes. During that time, he heard every sound the truck made. The engine, the trailer unit, the plastic creaking in the cab, the small taps from heat shifting in the metal. Twice, he thought he heard tapping near the passenger side. Tap, tap, then nothing. He didn't open the door. When the state trooper arrived, Mike climbed out and told him everything. The trooper didn't laugh. That helped a little. They searched the cab with flashlights. This time, they found more than dust. Behind the sleeper mattress, wedged between the wall and the bunk frame, was a small folding knife, not Mike's. Inside the storage compartment, they found a plastic grocery bag with 2 empty water bottles, a half-eaten protein bar, and a receipt from the gas station Mike had just left. The receipt time was 2:31 a.m., 9 minutes before Mike walked inside. Then the trooper found the jacket. It was stuffed under the bunk, a dusty brown suit jacket, damp around the collar. Mike stared at it. Same color, same style. The same jacket the man at Pump 2 had been wearing. The trooper put on gloves and checked the pockets. No wallet, no ID, just a folded piece of paper. It had license plate numbers written on it. Truck numbers. Company names. Some were crossed out. Some had question marks beside them. Mike couldn't tell if his exact truck number was written there, but 2 of the company names belonged to carriers he recognized. One of them was his own company. That changed the whole situation. This wasn't just some random guy trying to sleep somewhere warm. Someone had been watching trucks. Maybe writing down which drivers were alone. Maybe choosing which rigs looked easiest to get into. The trooper asked Mike if anything was missing. Mike checked. Wallet was still there. Fuel card was still there. Load paperwork was still there. Nothing obvious had been taken. That made it worse, because if the man wasn't stealing, then what was he doing? The trooper called it in and told Mike to follow him to a larger truck stop about 30 miles ahead. It had lights, cameras, staff, and other drivers. Mike followed close behind the patrol car the whole way. When they got there, he parked near the front entrance under bright lights and didn't sleep. Not for a minute. By morning, another officer came to take a full statement. They had already requested the gas station's security footage. Later that day, Mike was told the footage showed him entering the store at 2:43 a.m. It also showed the man in the brown jacket walking toward Mike's truck while Mike was inside. The camera angle didn't show the passenger door clearly. For almost 2 minutes, the man was out of frame. Then, Mike came out, got in, and drove away. The man never appeared again on the gas station camera. That meant he had gotten into the truck. There was no question anymore. Mike asked about the cashier. The officer said the cashier claimed he didn't see anything. Mike knew that was a lie. The cashier had seen the man. Mike had watched his face change. But knowing something and proving it are 2 different things. A few days later, Mike's company called and asked if he wanted to take time off. At first, he said no. He didn't want to lose money, and part of him didn't want to admit how badly it had gotten to him. But after 2 more nights of checking the sleeper every few minutes, he finally admitted he wasn't okay. He kept seeing that reflection in his phone screen. A person crouched low behind him, close enough to reach out while he was driving. Weeks passed, and Mike never heard that the man had been caught. But he did hear from other drivers. Once word got around, a few truckers told him there had been strange reports around that same stretch of highway. Drivers finding cabinets open after fuel stops. Storage seals tampered with. One driver waking up at a rest area and seeing a man walking away from his trailer. Another driver said a guy at that same gas station had asked him strange questions. You driving solo? You sleep in there? You keep the cab locked? At the time, the driver thought the guy was just being weird. After hearing Mike's story, he wasn't so sure. Mike doesn't know what the man wanted from him. Maybe he was trying to steal. Maybe he wanted a ride without being seen. Maybe the vehicle behind him was connected. Maybe it was all part of some setup targeting tired drivers at isolated stops. But the possibility that scares Mike the most is simple. Maybe the man wasn't planning to get out when he did. Maybe Mike noticing him forced him to run. Maybe if Mike had kept driving until he got tired and pulled into some dark rest area, the man would have waited until he was asleep. Mike still drives trucks, but he changed almost everything about how he does it. He checks the cab before every stop. He checks it again after every stop. He locks both doors even if he's only stepping away for 10 seconds. He doesn't stop at tiny gas stations after midnight unless he absolutely has to. And he never leaves the sleeper curtain closed while driving. A month later, while cleaning out his sleeper at a terminal in California, Mike found one more thing. It was tucked between the mattress and the wall, deep enough that he only noticed it because he was changing the bedding. A torn piece from a Nevada road map. Small, dirty, folded once. When he opened it, he saw a section of highway circled in black marker. The circle was around the same stretch where he had pulled over and the man slipped out. There was no message, no name, no creepy phrase, just the circled road. Mike gave it to his company's safety manager, and they passed it on to police. Nothing came from it. No arrest, no update, no closure. And that's what still bothers him. Because out on the road, some things happen in places where there are no witnesses, no cameras, no nearby houses, no one to hear you if something goes wrong. People can disappear into the dark. Vehicles can vanish down empty highways. And most of the world will never know anything happened. Mike says he doesn't believe in ghosts. He doesn't think the man appeared from nowhere. He doesn't think anything supernatural happened that night. He thinks something much worse. He thinks the man was real. He thinks someone helped him. And he thinks that gas station wasn't just a random stop. It was a place where certain people waited, watching for tired drivers. Drivers alone. Drivers distracted. Drivers who left their doors unlocked for 1 minute too long. To this day, Mike keeps a flashlight within reach. He keeps the sleeper curtain open. And every once in a while, late at night, when the highway is empty and the radio goes quiet, he glances into the sleeper mirror and feels his stomach tighten. Because for half a second, he swears he can still picture someone crouched behind him, low beside the bunk, silent, waiting for the right time to move. That's it for these stories. If they left you feeling a bit shook, or just a little too sketched out to hit the lights tonight, then you know you're in the right place. I'll keep the nightmare fuel coming as long as you're down to listen. If you don't want to miss the next ones, hit that subscribe button before you head out. Stay safe, and good night.